In your prayers, it would be very kind to remember Dr. Frederick Danker, who's one of our benefactors. Dr. Danker is 91 and had a fall, broke his leg, wound up with surgery and some complications thereafter. And we'd surely love to see him be well. And I know that Kathy, his daughter, and others would appreciate you remembering him in your prayers. Michelle is getting an excellent report from the biopsy. We're very happy for that. But she has a very severe virus that might have some other people hospitalized at the moment, but doesn't have her hospitalized, and we certainly want her to be well from that as well. But she maybe won't be back with us for work for a couple of days until that virus is better. We can't read Scripture in a vacuum, and it's especially important for us to know that, those of us who've been reading Scripture for a long time. When we come to Scripture, especially familiar text, we come with pre-understanding. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just something to be honest about, something to acknowledge. Now, we want to come with pre-understanding, and that's okay, but sometimes we come with pre-misunderstanding, and that's not okay. It's not like you can do the brain scrub and erase. You can't erase, and since we can't erase, we must test and think and reason together. Doubting Thomas was not alone in his doubt. Everybody doubts some way, sometime, somehow, some way. When the mob took Jesus from the Garden of Gethsemane, the disciples scattered. You could read that as evidence of doubt. 2 of them followed at a distance, and one of those 2 denied 3 times. Evidence of doubt. Even after the resurrection, John 20 and verse 9, as yet they did not know the Scripture, that He must be raised from the dead. And we wonder, how in the world could they miss that with the many clues and hints and prophecies and clear statements? Just think about yourself. How many things have you missed? I've waited at the wrong McDonald's in this little town that only has 2, wondering where those other people were and why they stood me up. I sat down last night at the computer keyboard ready for Laura to bring my sandwich that she had picked up on the way from work. And she understood that we were going to get a sandwich. So there was no sandwich. We just misunderstand continually. And we need to think these people in the Bible are just as human as we are human. We're reading from John, but you know from the other Gospels that the 11 did not believe Mary Magdalene when she came telling them of the empty tomb and the word that Jesus had risen. And when 10 of the 11 saw Jesus, now I'm amazed, they're in the room, the door's shut, Jesus appears. The idea there is no door opened and there was no trap door, no window, He just appeared. They're impressed, but Thomas is not impressed. He showed the 10, the hands, the side. That helped them. Clear evidence of a risen Lord. But even then, we're just ready to start thinking about our text. Thomas was not with them when Jesus came. Some people have said that good exegesis is asking good questions of the text. And I can buy that. There's some questions, though, that are not so good. Rick, I've heard people hang up on John 20:24. Why was Thomas not with them? He should be ashamed. The 12, 11 should be together at all. No, there's no hint of that. We don't have a clue. There are no data. It may be he's visiting a sick cousin. He's feeding the donkey. He had to have a bathroom break. He's running an errand to town to pick up food. Since we have no clue, don't chase that rabbit. If you caught him, you wouldn't know, and it wouldn't be a rabbit anyway. Speculation is worthless in that kind of situation. Verse 25, though, the other disciples said to him, "We've seen the Lord." And then Thomas lays down his rules for belief. I am willing to believe in the resurrected Lord only if I see the nail prints, put my finger in them, and put my hand in His side. Otherwise, I'm not believing. Now, there's an opportunity for a question. Who gets to set the standard for believability? Where is the threshold for the evidence that underlies faith? One deal is I'm going to do this my way, selfishly and personally. What works for Bill and what works for Thomas, I'll put it on the table, and that's the law. The better way is, let's look at Scripture and see what standard for believability, what threshold for evidence God sets. What does the Lord find reasonable? He made us and He knows everything. Am I willing to let the Lord lead me in this way? It's a much sounder approach. Now, another bunny you don't want to chase here. The motive of Thomas for this statement. Because Scripture gives no data on motive for this statement. People will speculate. He is so hurt by the death of Jesus and his world has been collapsed, imploded. He doesn't have any choice. I believe he did. People tend to see what they want to see, and Thomas has not seen, and he needs to see with these literal eyes. I've got to be careful with these literal eyes. Mine don't work so well without the glasses anymore, at least up close. I need them. And I've been to those Ripley's sort of places where water flows up hills and balls roll uphill without being pushed. And you know that's not really the case. You know that there's something odd about the architecture or the scheme of that room that makes it appear so. I have stopped at traffic light down here on Helton Drive to make the left turn and almost broken my foot pushing brake pedal, Rick, because I thought I was moving backward and I wasn't. It was that 18-wheeler next to me creeping forward, and my perception was so different in that moment. 8 days pass. They're together. Thomas is with them. The doors are still shut. And there's Jesus in the midst of them. Peace be with you. Offering Thomas the chance to reach your finger here. Look at my hands, your hand here, put it in my side. Do not be doubting, unbelieving, but rather be faithful, be believing. Rosemary, I can't help but think about those 8 days between that first encounter and the second. You have 10 who are believing because they have seen, they're convicted and convinced. And you have the one holdout. It's like the jury room where the one person is holding out. Can you imagine the tension and the pressure? We're not given data here, but we know something about human nature. And knowing something about human nature, it gives us a real opportunity to think. But I love the way Jesus comes in. Not adversarial, not attacking, not doing the Gibbs thing to Thomas, tapping him behind the head because he's been dumb. His peace be with you, to all of them. And he offers the man the opportunity to do the very thing he has requested. Look, stick your finger in, put your hand in. And Rick, that kind of blows me away. You know, you would never do this, but sometimes students, after a really bad test, how dare that professor do us this wickedly on this examination? This is a horrible thing. When I see him next, I'm going to tell... Yes, sir. We're glad to see you again today. I hope you got our test graded, sir. We might talk one way, but then you get in front of the person and things sort of change. All of a sudden, Thomas doesn't need to put his finger in the nail holes. And he does not need to put his hand in Jesus' side. I'm impressed that Jesus didn't throw Thomas away. I'm impressed that Thomas recovered to a degree and thought better of his previous words. But I believe verse 29 is another fine biblical example of ellipsis. Thomas, because you have seen me with your own eyes, you believe. Blessed are those who have not seen me with their own physical eyes, but yet have believed. You know, one of the problems with Thomas and his doubt, his faith here, it wasn't just the matter of that one encounter with Jesus witnessed by the 10. There's a wealth of other evidence in play. Thomas should have believed the prophecies from Isaiah 53. From the Psalms and the rest of the Old Testament. Thomas should have believed the women who found the tomb empty and encountered the angels. Thomas should have believed Peter. Thomas should have understood some words that Jesus himself spoke and words spoken about Jesus. destroy this temple, I will raise it up again in 3 days. The work of God is that you believe in Him whom He has sent. I shall be with you a little while longer. Then I go to Him who sent me. You will seek me, but not find. Where I go, you cannot come. The Father loves me, because I lay down my life to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of myself. Or John 12, 23, 24. The hour is come that the Son of God, the Son of Man, should be glorified. Most assuredly I say to you, unless a grain of wheat falls to the earth and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it produces much fruit. And then, a little later in John 12. And I, if I be lifted up from the earth, will draw all peoples unto myself. This He said, signifying the manner of death that He should die. The Lord never intended that every believer would see Jesus with the physical eyes post-resurrection. But the Lord never intended that we believe in a vacuum. He gives evidence, reason. He provides data for us. And I believe with all my heart that there really should be no division between 29 and 30 here in these verses. The Lord didn't do verses. John didn't write in verses. He wrote a letter, and then verses are added for our convenience, and sometimes section headings added. Truly, Jesus did many other signs in the presence of His disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you may have life in His name. Sufficient evidence. But not just sufficient. Overwhelming evidence. Now you may be ahead of me on this. And you may be thinking, Bill, you argue for evidence. You speak about conditions under which you believe. But bottom line, it sounds to me like you're still saying all this stuff is about faith. Bingo. It's all about faith always. The just shall live by faith. From beginning to end, it's faith. Without faith, it's impossible to please Him. He who comes to God must believe that He is, and that He's a rewarder of those who diligently seek Him. The deal here is what kind of faith? There are people who promote the idea of blind faith. No, I don't want to go there at all. Blind is dark, uninformed. I want to promote the idea of biblical faith. Faith that's laid on a foundation, historical foundation. Faith that's based and amplified by the testimony of people who had good sense and were eyewitnesses. That helps me. But one of the things that helps me as much as anything is faith that wasn't there. Then stuff happens, and it is there. In my judgment, one of the strongest evidences of the resurrection is the radical transformation of the disciples. How in the world do you get from scattered, scared to die, to standing up to kings and rulers willing to be beheaded? Something changed in a huge and wondrous way. When it comes to Thomas, should Thomas be our example? No and yes. Thomas should not be our example in terms of I'm going to selfishly, arbitrarily, or uniquely set the standard for my faith. I'm going to set the standard for the evidence I'm willing to accept. Bad business. But the business of turning around when the evidence confronts you, the business of my Lord and my God, that's a good example. A fine one. The disciples of Jesus saw more than we'll ever see. They saw more than John records for us. And I like that. The Lord mounds up evidence, but He doesn't just keep mounting it up to fill the whole earth. What is written is sufficient. It has been deemed sufficient by God And if we let God set the standard, it is sufficient for us. And I appreciate that all the more. Thomas, because you've seen me, you've believed. Good. Glad you have. Move forward. Blessed are those who have not seen with their own eyes, but yet have believed. Don't feel shortchanged because you haven't yet seen with your own eyes. If God pronounces a blessing and wants to deliver that to us, let's take it and appreciate that blessing. This I can promise. You will see with your own eyes. And when you see, you'll be glad you believed. What a blessing of God.